Welcome to Attention Retention with Jackie McManus, your source for the latest trends in transportation recruitment and retention.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of Attention Retention. I'm Jackie McManus, CEO and founder of KJ Media. We're a recruitment advertising agency specializing in talent attraction, optimizing hiring processes, and driving efficiency to help grow your workforce in the trucking industry. And on this show, we dive into the world of recruitment, retention, and recognition by interviewing industry leaders and experts as we unpack the strategies, challenges, and successes surrounding these three critical aspects of workforce management. And this week, I am so thrilled to have on Marina, co-founder, managing director of Apex Transit and Logistics. Thank you so much, Marina, for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Jackie.
Yes, absolutely. Apex Transit and Logistics has a collective of 35 years of experience in the asset-based trucking industry and really focuses on combining your experience and fostering transparent communication as a commitment to excellence. And so when we spoke a couple of months ago, I was just so excited to hear about what your team does over there and how you treat your drivers, and thrilled to have you share your insights with our audience today. But before we dive into the 3 R's, could you introduce yourself to the audience and then tell them about your journey in becoming the managing director of Apex?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jackie. And this is a topic very near and dear to my heart. I love everything retention, recruiting, and that's so happy to talk about it. Thank you. Then the reason why I'm passionate about it is because I'm just passionate in general about the trucking industry. And the way I came about it was kind of strange. I never thought I would be here, but now that I'm here, I feel like I'm truly living on purpose what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's a great feeling to be an advocate in the industry. So I started as an owner operator's daughter. My dad was a truck driver and he had his own truck since 2005. And I would spend summers with him on the road, going from New York to California and seeing the US, seeing the beauty and also the dark side of trucking as well. The truck stops that are not very safe, the issues with the hours of service my dad would have, the way he was treated at shippers. And it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And I said, I don't ever want to go into trucking again. Mm-hmm. And, the life kind of turned me back around. And in 2012, when we had our first daughter, my husband and I had decided that in order for us to proceed, the best way would be to actually have our own trucking company. And so we started Apex Transit. It was all started with one owner operator, which was my dad. And in 2013, we got our first truck. And this year we built it up to 70 trucks and over 70 drivers and 100 dry vans. So really proud of how far we've come. Of course, it was not a piece of cake. It was just a little bit of work, but I've learned a lot of hard lessons along the way. And I am passionate about sharing my lessons and helping someone not make the same mistakes I have. That's why I like talking about the subject. Like, hey, you learn a lot the wrong way. So if you can learn from somebody else, that's better.
Always is. And I appreciate you sharing your journey. Trucking is in the family blood, and you often don't hear it that, folks started, they were with their dad and driving across the 48, and then they just decided, I don't know if this is for me. And then they start their own company. So that's a real testament to the passion, to the industry. And, you said something about sharing your knowledge and a lot of learning lessons along the way. And that's why we have this podcast. It's because, with our clients, the question is, how do we recruit better? How do we retain better? How do we recognize our drivers? And, in a way, we're all competing with each other, but at the same time, we're competing with outside industries. So the goal of this podcast is really share what's going well, maybe what's not, and any tips. So appreciate you again being on. I want to kick off with the first R, which is the front line of the process, recruitment. What have you found to be some successful approaches to attracting and recruiting drivers in today's market?
Absolutely. I can talk about this for a long time. So there's so many different strategies that you can see. I'm like, all right, let's get to work. One thing I forgot to mention is that my husband drove, and when we started the company with his brother, he was also a driver. So
Oh,
at one point, there were four brothers working in the company, and all of them, almost all of them, had their CDL licenses. So they had that experience of being on the road as a driver firsthand, and that has led us to making a lot of the decisions that we make for the company based on their experience and based on my experience as well from being the wife and the daughter of a truck driver. And what we wanted to do was create an atmosphere for the driver where we took away as many outside stressors as possible. As you know, there's so many things out there on the road that we cannot control. We cannot control the weather. We cannot control the traffic. We cannot control what the shippers do. But there are certain things that, as a company, we can do to help prevent additional stress to the drivers. So if we can create a job that, or an opportunity for the folks to come into a place that has already eliminated or reduced some of that, then that can lead to a long-term, job satisfaction and less burnout. A lot of the drivers will leave the industry just because they can no longer handle all of the demands that they have on them. And for us, it was a place where we wanted to create a place where drivers felt that they were valued, appreciated, and they could actually be here long term, that they had enough family time, that they were able, it's not just like a hustle kind of situation where we make a little bit of money and then I do something else. No,
right.
this is a long term career. And how do we create that? So we can dive more into that if you want to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And we have, many clients, I'd say about 50 to 70% of them, especially if they're, smaller, around 50 to 500 trucks. Many times they're family run businesses, and it typically starts with a, somewhat similar story where they wanted to create their own business. And because they were a driver themselves, they know how to treat drivers. And I often find companies that have had that experience in leadership typically have a better, retention rate across the board. I mean, let's face it, it's a very challenging industry, and sometimes on the advertising side, which is what we're in, is very much, we obviously want to spread the good word of what your company is doing, but when the driver talks to the recruiter, the transparency needs to be so locked in about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so, having your spouse and having family that have been in the industry, you're able to probably hone in a little bit more on
Absolutely.
what's, what are the pros, what are the cons, and, how do we overcome that?
Girl, you are preaching to the choir. That is huge. Like you said, right? And I personally interviewed hundreds of drivers when we were hiring the drivers. I was the driver recruiter when we started, and I loved hearing their stories. But there was a very common theme that I have learned is that drivers don't trust recruiters anymore. They have been lied to, or misled. Maybe that would be the nicer way to say it.
Well,
But
I've heard lied quite a bit, so
yeah, yeah, misled. Uh,
misled. We'll keep it corporate. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, misled about what the job opportunity actually is to
Yeah.
get in the door. And that was the one thing that I was very clear on from the beginning. We're going to tell you the good, the bad, and ugly from up front. You're going to know
Mhm.
exactly what we do here. These are the hours that we expect you to work. These are the routes. This is the equipment, and it either works or it doesn't. It's not Apex is not for everyone, but if it works for you, then I'd rather you know right up front what this, and I would have that conversation. I'd speak to the driver on the phone, maybe anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. By that time, I told them everything, our story, our
I
equipment,
love
our
that.
lanes. And at that point, we don't go any further. And if you don't feel comfortable with this, it's like, is this a good fit for you? Is
Mhm.
this a good fit for your family? If yes, awesome, let's proceed. If not, best of luck to you. No hard feelings. And one of those things that I would tell the drivers is just, I tell them the same story. I understand, maybe not like from your perspective, but from my family's perspective, I could see how difficult your job is and how challenging it is. And here's what we do at Apex to help you with that. Number one, the biggest thing that a driver is worried about is their safety on the road. So is the
Mhm.
equipment that you're in, is it safe? Is it well maintained? Is it
Mhm.
a cannibalized piece of equipment that's, you don't know if it has all the, if it's been properly maintained and you're out there risking your life and the life of others with a bad piece of equipment. So
Mhm.
that's one thing that I never had to worry about with Apex. We've got a brand new trucks. We were just recently featured in Volvo for our all Volvo fleet. We invest in
Congrats.
safety in the trucks. our Volvo dealer was like, "Are you speccing these trucks for a whole bunch of owner operators? Because I haven't seen company drivers get these kind of trucks in a long time."
Is that
And it's
right?
little things like
Yeah.
seat coolers and warmers, and like the back massagers, and the
Yeah.
and big things like dynamic steering, where you're not you're not utilizing constantly having to hold the wheel, and it makes your job a little bit easier long term.
So it's really catering the drivers to, what works. And I love your point on it's not for everyone. That's something that we often talk about. And I think that's where that misguided, misled, because sometimes recruiters, and I get that as well, are incentivized, but it's how many phone calls can they make? How many conversations can they have? And I believe that it does come down to the length of the conversation and building that relationship right from the beginning and addressing those concerns from the start. In a way, recruiting is sales, right? And so on
Oh,
the sales end, it is. And there needs to be training around that, more training around that, and constantly optimizing that process. But on the sales end, you're always looking at, hey, what are their challenges and what's my value proposition? And also, it's okay to say this might not be the best fit because 90 days down the road, they may, hand in their notice. And so if you can avoid that from the front end, I think that's huge. A big challenge is it's become so easy for candidates to apply. So recruiters will have hundreds of candidates right in their ATS. So it's how do you differentiate which ones are more qualified or pre-screened to be able to have those lengthier conversations. So the power of AI and some automation and technology, but you need the human component, right? The bottom
absolutely.
line is that it's
Everything is a
human
human
to
touch.
human.
Yeah.
There are ways to accelerate it, but we always say, and that's a lot of what we do, but it's how can you connect to that person? It's person to person
Yeah.
and really, really making that connection. I'd be curious, how do you differentiate yourself in this competitive market over the years?
That's a great question. And in terms of what I heard from my drivers in the past experience is that when you called me back, I had a feeling like you cared about me as an individual. It
Is that
wasn't
right?
just like, getting my job done. It's how many, it's the usual questions like how many years of experience, like, how about we just take a few minutes to get to know the person? And it doesn't take a lot of training. You don't have to have past experience. You don't have to, I always recommend anyone who's going to have a driver recruiter to have them actually ride along with a driver for a minimum a day. A week would be great,
Mm-hmm.
but at least one day, get in the truck and see what that driver puts up with.
Mm-hmm.
So that those little things like, hey, where are you from? Okay, awesome. What's your family situation like? Do you need to be home on the weekends? Like, what's important for you? Why a little bit of empathy and validation goes a long way. If they talk about why they left their last job, just little things like that makes sense that you were treated that you were misled and or lied to, and that's frustrating. Just like little validation, little things, and all of a
Yes.
sudden you're building rapport and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those things it's hard to teach, but I think
It is.
if you want to be the best in this industry, if you want to be the best recruiter and separate yourself from the many other people who are calling, you got to have a little bit of advantage. And that human touch and that caring goes a long way, because there's just seeing how drivers are treated. There's not a lot of people who show caring to them. So if you can be different and stand out in that way, and that's how I did it, and that's how I trained my recruiter right now. He actually was a driver for me.
Is that
So
right?
when he calls and talks to drivers, he's just like, "Hey, I've been with Apex since 2016."
Yeah. Talk about a testimonial right there.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's
In a way, it's psychology 101, right? And a lot of folks that we've been speaking with, it comes down to those soft core skills, which is being transparent, being able to listen and have an empathy. And those are challenging, right? To teach, but
mhm,
at the same time, it's essential in today's market. I always say
absolutely.
this, if we were recruiting for an in-office administrator, let's call it secretary to a CFO, the time, the due diligence that we put into hiring each person in office is extensive. And we're treating them with a lot of respect and being very honest. And so that should be the same for drivers. They should be
Absolutely. And that is how it is.
totally, yeah. expectations should be clear, because typically, and I'd love to get your viewpoint, once a recruiter brings on a driver, sometimes there's a fall off in communication between recruiting and operations. So recruiter said this, operations said this. I mean, how do you navigate some of those, challenges, or what advice would you give to folks that are going through that?
Absolutely. And I can see that being a challenge when the recruiter is working remotely and is not in the office. But my
Mm-hmm.
recruiter is the one who's done the job, worked in the office, and works really closely with the team. And we the way I've structured it, because I had my hand in both operations and in that recruiting,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I
beautiful.
structured it in a way that it flows, where
Yeah.
I knew from the operational side what needed to be communicated to the driver. So the communication is so clear; it's almost too much at one point. We're like, they're like, there's too much information, so we have to kind of like
Yeah.
slowly feed it to them over the weeks. But in that situation where it's really important to make sure that you guys are both on the same page, where the recruiter maybe at the same, just like they have done the driver's job for one day, they're able to observe or look at what the operations team does and see how they work to be able to better understand what they're communicating to the driver, like knowing what
Mhm.
the job entails. And and actually utilizing exit interviews and maybe complaints or some dissatisfied drivers to figure out what went wrong and what did I tell you that was different from what you experienced. So that would I
Mhm.
would suggest, that's another way to find out how, because we're all making mistakes every day and we're learning from our experiences. So it's,
Absolutely. Mistakes are opportunities to learn and
yeah,
grow. Yeah, and
absolutely.
that's that thought leadership from the top is super important, because that just trickles down to the recruiters, to the drivers, to the operations, and I want to move over to retention, and this really does fall in line, because a lot of turnover we find from folks in the industry is within the first 90 days, and it's typically because those expectations on the front end were not clear, and maybe their weekly mileage is different than what it was expected to be, and so that's usually where we see the turnover. But I'd be curious, from your point of view, from all the hats you've worn in your career, what have you found to be some more successful approaches to retaining your workforce?
Absolutely. I think those first 90 days are critical, but the first
Hmm.
2 weeks are crucial, where
Okay.
it is just so imperative to follow up and build relationships right away. Where we have a strict communication policy where our team has to reach out to the dispatch, to the driver almost on a daily basis, and not always just work related. It's more like, is there anything we can help you with? How's your day going? Is everything, do you have all the tools you need to succeed in that way?
Mhm.
And when they come back, usually after the first or second week, we'll do a post kind of a trip interview with them and ask them, has this, have you received support here? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have all the tools you need, again, like for success? And that shows them the caring part, and you can
Mhm.
solve a lot of the issues this first couple of weeks, that come up, that, when it's a new job, you don't really know what's going on. And then just being hyper aware of the newer driver, keep making sure that everyone's aware of their name in the office when they come in, greet them. Just simple things of just making someone feel like a human being. And it goes a
It's
long
it's
way.
it's amazing. We have, oh gosh, I think 50 or 55 podcasts now at this point over the year, and one phrase always comes out every show is treating the drivers like a human being, and it's something that it's said in the industry, right? But saying thank you, knowing their name, it goes the extra mile. No pun intended, but it goes the extra mile. If you think about it, drivers are remote workers, right? And so with every company, it's difficult to establish that relationship from the beginning. So having that as part of the team, internal team, reaching out to them within the first 2 weeks to understand, again, the good, the bad, the ugly from the driver and their point of view, goes a long way. And bottom line is, people want to feel valued, they want to feel heard. A lot of times maybe you can't control the shipper and some of the issues that are happening there, but if you can at least listen and make a suggestion moving forward, that does go a long way. um,
Absolutely.
and it's rare to find that in companies.
Yeah, and it's surprising for me, and kind of shocking that we even actually have to say that treat a driver like a human being.
It is,
That
isn't
there's
it?
the implied bias that there should be any other way, and we'd never say that to an office employee. Treat your sales team like they're a
Right.
human being. So there's that inherent bias towards drivers is like what when we started the podcast. As I said, that's why I didn't want to be in this industry. Just I didn't want to be in an industry where that's how our most valued asset, right? The most important
Right.
person is driving that truck is being treated. So, and it's been my goal to build a company with my husband in a way that was driver centered. You know, he's the one who specs the trucks like uh, better than anyone we've seen for this, specifically for the driver to be comfortable. You know, the when he purchases the truck and he puts that little extra on there, he's like, I've been a driver. I know what it's like to sit for 10, 11 hours. I want to
Right.
have the most comfortable seat. I want to have that dynamic steering for the truck. I want to be able to have the safety features that are actually driver friendly versus driver harmful. There's some features
Mhm.
that don't help the driver. So that goes a long way. But I want to go back to another point that we talked about. You know, just the basics are like know the driver's name, say hello to them, speak to them. But then it can go even deeper, right? It's just like having how can you communicate as a team and go above and beyond to build that relationship with a driver.
Right.
An example would be if a driver's asking you and calls you and, hey, I need to be home, this and this and this. Can you make that happen? And you're looking at at the situation, and based on whatever all that information is in front of you, you know it's not possible. You know, but you don't know. Maybe there's something else that you could do. You can figure it out. So instead of just immediately telling the driver, can't make it happen. Sorry, you know, better luck next time. Just say, let me see what I can do for you. And it's just a simple phrase of like, hey, I'm looking out for you. Let me see what I can do for you. And all of it just changes everything. And it's
Mm.
really all about communication, not just with your recruiter, but the rest of the team. That's something I'm really passionate about. And I just do continual training with my team on how you speak to someone really matters. And I love like the psychology aspect that you mentioned, the way
Yeah.
you could still be you know, say everything perfectly fine. And you could have a direct style of communication, but someone could perceive it as like, that
Hmm.
was rude. Why did they say it that
Hmm.
way? So if we can do everything on our end to make sure that we come off as uh, empathetic and as you know as a human as possible towards this person, then at that point, how someone perceives it is really up to them. You know, it's not really our responsibility. But if there was a neglect in how you've handled something, that's on you. And if the driver is now full of resentment and driving that truck angry or frustrated, that was on the operations team. So I teach my dispatch staff and my logistics coordinator about how important it is to communicate with the driver in like you just really watch your words, right? Like and little things like that go a long way. Let me see what I can do for you. Or,
I love
yeah, if they're sick, just call and follow up with them. How are you feeling? Sorry to hear that. Like, how's your mom? There's right now, there's just seems to be
Mhm.
like a lot of stuff happening. It's like, how's your mom doing? I heard your grandma passed away. I'm so sorry to hear that. Just little things like that. And
Mhm.
I mean, they seem small, but they go a long way. And there's times that we miss that. And as a owner, if I hear that we have a driver leaving because of the fact that they didn't feel valued, appreciated. I take that personally. That really bothers me. And I'll go back and go through all the steps and find the ways that we fail and be like, this is what we need to change to do better going forward. I'm not saying this in the way that we're perfect, but that's my goal. That's what I'm striving towards. That's where our culture is at.
Mhm. I appreciate everything you said, and I think the communication, training the team is something that I'd like to see more companies do. When it comes to, I mean, of course, the frontline recruiters, right? Get them, trained to have these open-ended questions and finding out exactly what the driver is looking for versus checking the box, if they meet their criteria. And then secondly, with that, the dispatch operations team, if you go to Psychology 101, it's two different sides of the brain, typically ops versus sales. And so typically their brain doesn't think in that way. It's very direct. Yes, no, yes, no. I know even on my team, the folks that are, managing all the ads, they're direct. That little piece though, training your team on some of those examples you use really does go a long way. That's something drivers really, they remember. I'm on Sirius XM Road Dog Trucking once a month with Tim Rilligley, and we talk to drivers, and we have them call in. And, my goal is to find out exactly how do they find this company that they're working for, but more importantly, what's keeping them at their current company. I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's because of how the company communicated with the driver. Their wife was ill. The company called to check in to see how she's doing. It was these soft, questions and relationship building, but that's why they stayed with current companies. I mean, that's typically what it boils down to. Obviously, safety is number one priority. But there was a study recently that acknowledgement and praise was number two. Because if you think about pay, it's pretty competitive across the board, and we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in difference in pay. It's really competitive. So how you communicate with your driver is absolutely key.
Absolutely. You're preaching again to the choir. I love it. And
Yeah, we
and
could
we have
talk
a
a long
long
time
way
about
as
that.
an yeah, I know.
Yes,
And it
yes,
just seems like, it's like, well, you're not really reinventing the wheel. I'm not telling you anything new or different, but I'm just sharing my experience in that. There have been times where I've known that a driver got stuck somewhere for had a layover a day or two, and I'll make sure I tell the team, make sure you know that we're taking care of this driver. And there was a situation where he was just getting a little bit frustrated, and
Okay.
I personally called a manager above that, and I like, listen, this is a situation. Sometimes it takes getting away from the heated, and they were able to help me out and fit the driver in so he wouldn't have to stay there from Thursday to Monday of the following week. And I called the driver and I told him, I didn't want you to get stuck over Memorial Day weekend. I called the company and I'm working on your behalf to make sure that we can get you out as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience. We appreciate you. I know how difficult it is to be stuck somewhere and to get to receive that news, and you handled it so well. Thank you. That means a lot. And now a potential driver could have possibly abandoned that truck and caused so many more issues if if we didn't take that extra step to intervene. Even if it's a driver's fault, like let's say he was late to that appointment,
Right.
and now just like we're all human. Just show grace, and that goes a
No
long way, because now
grace.
that driver has built that relationship, and he's like, all right, well, Marina and Apex were there for me, and I'm going to be them for, like, it just becomes this relationship where we're looking out for one another. It cannot be a one-way street. You cannot expect the driver to just drive for you without any problems and be an ideal driver, and you don't go out of your way to help them as well.
The amount of attention that you and your team put to the things that you can control is incredibly impressive. I think that is truly something that many companies can adopt, because we know the nature of the business, we know the nature of the industry. Things happen. It's part of life. But if you can just go that little extra mile and control those conversations a little bit better and control maybe the seats, right? Taking pieces that you all know are a little bit of a roadblock and addressing them. Because in the long run, when you look at it, it may be a little bit of a higher cost now for those seats, for example. In the long run, you'll have a better retention rate, which will help with your recruiting budget, which will, right? So it all trickles down, but it does. I'm truly impressed with the attention that you guys put to cultivating those relationships. I have a question for you on, if I was a trucking company and I'm experiencing, let's say, 110% turnover, smaller family-owned business, what would you suggest as small baby steps, if you will, to tackle that issue? I'd love to get your input, because I think there's so much good information out there, and we're trying to develop even better information on this podcast, but sometimes it's overwhelming for a lot of trucking owners to get started, right? They, just accept it. So I'd love to know any initial tips you would have for a company that may be experiencing that on a small scale.
Okay, so a smaller company, 110% turnover. How small are we talking? Do they have a dedicated? I need all the details. Do they have a dedicated?
We're making this up. Let's say it's dedicated routes. They are, let's say OTR dedicated and family-owned business, but they have 110% percent turnover.
How many trucks are we talking?
Let's make it 150.
Oh, okay. So it's like a good sized company. I would look at why we're having a turnover. So if you don't have an exit interview with the drivers or a post, like that's the first step I would do is just implement that right away and see why people are leaving. There will be there will be your usual like found, moved, all of that you cannot control.
Yeah,
But like really laser in on those things. Why did the person
I
leave?
love that.
Sometimes it actually like goes back to one person. It could be one dispatcher that's being really rude to the drivers. It could be one manager that's like being disrespectful or putting somebody down. There's no quicker way to get rid of a driver or like how or to lose a driver than to be disrespectful to them over and over and over again. Like we'll just that's humans will there's just no need for that, and that's usually I find that if there's a turnover there's a way that there was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. And so I have recordings on all of my on my lines, on my office lines. So if there's a conversation in question, I'll always go back and listen. And we'll do some the coaching calls. We'll just listen in and see how the conversations are going. So if there's and there's times that somebody could say something one way, but someone could perceive it another way. Why are you late? Is an accusatory type of statement versus, hey, I see you're not able to make it to your appointment. Is everything okay? Now there's two completely different conversations happening. And, it can go one way or another. If the driver is late due to their own negligence, that will be discovered one way or another. But now you're giving them an opportunity to be like, so sorry, man, I overslept. My alarm didn't go off.
Right.
I will, whatever the consequences are, I understand them. I'll just keep going. And so,
I love
yeah.
that first step, and thanks for playing along with me on looking at specifically the exit interviews to start. That's sometimes a step that gets overlooked. It may be implemented, but it may not go into depth, or sometimes everyone's too busy. But I think that is a really great tip, is to look at the exit interviews. Well, first of all, have the exit interviews. Most of the time, 99% of the time, people are happy to give their feedback. And honestly, at that point, so
You know
look
what
at
I
that.
find with exit interviews? I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
but
go
if you
ahead.
send it to them an email, no one will do it. You got to catch them in person when they're turning in their keys or when they have to have like that last conversation. You just have to like someone will have to sit with them and write those. Do it like if it's online, do it in front of the computer. But just it has. And I like to have my recruiters do it because then they know what didn't work.
That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, I really
So
like, because that ends up being full circle, so they can understand exactly what worked, what may have not, and you could tailor it from there. So,
mhm.
that's really great. And I just want to jump over to recognition. There's a lot of incredible things we talked about around the soft skills and appreciating drivers and having empathy and the power of thank you and knowing these drivers' names. That really goes a long way. Could you discuss any other forms of recognition practices that your team does to cultivate that team?
Absolutely. And recognition is another step that I will be very honest about. Is challenging for me at where we're at. And
Yeah.
when we were smaller, I was very much able to do the little things. Like, and I'm very proud of that. I knew when someone's birthday, I had a gym bag full of goodies for them when it was their birthday. Little things like someone became a great grandpa for the first time. We gave him a mug that said, and he still has that mug, world's best
Oh,
great grandfather. And that was so lovely for me. And I love knowing that I could do that for my drivers. And that was when we were around 30, 40 drivers. And now that we're closer to 70, it's becoming much more challenging to keep up with that in this current economic climate. There's a lot of cuts that are
absolutely.
being made. And we're not able to offer as much personalized attention. And I will always, for anybody who can, I would suggest to do that, to go above and beyond and just do those little things. But when you can't, what can you do? Is it, what can you reward them for their fuel savings? Like right, we have Samsara and we have the driver coaching and the points and all of that, and our quarterly bonuses based on the best drivers. So
Hmm.
and they're very personalized. One year I gave there's a theme park here in Charlotte called Carowinds, and it was a family season pass to a family of four for
Yeah.
so that they can go to Carowinds together. And that was the the prize that they got. It wasn't necessarily here's some money. Here's an experience that every time they go to Carowinds, they can think of Apex and be like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
We got
Yeah, absolutely.
or it could
Yeah.
be like one of those reoccurring monthly things that come
Yeah.
in, like cheese or ham or whatever it is that they like. It has to be
Mhm.
personal to that person, you know. And then when they see that you cared about me as an individual, to learn about me, to understand what I like, and give me something personalized, it goes a long way. So,
It sure does.
mhm,
It
little
sure
things
does.
like that. And I wish I could do more. Honestly, I would like to do more, but at this time, just full transparency. That's one of those things where we're not as good as we used to be, and that's what I'm actively working on. How can I create a structure where there's, because before it was me doing it. So when I was
Right.
charged, I was making sure I was like, because I genuinely really cared about every single person working. And to me, it was just because this is my business. It's like my baby. It's like everyone by an extension is, it feels like family. It's like a part of
Mhm.
my life. And so I wanted to do that. And there are times when we're so overwhelmed with so many other different things that are, as you grow, there's so many more responsibilities, especially when it comes to like paperwork right now, keeping track of all of that. It just
Mhm.
becomes this, like we lose that human touch. And it's true. And someone told me that over 50 trucks, you become less in touch with your drivers.
Mm.
And
Was that the number of 50
oh, not
trucks?
me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That won't happen. That won't happen. And I think, I know this from our conversation. It, you're diligent about training your internal team to talk to drivers to understand, why they should maybe join the company, what are they looking for, learning about their family, all the way through to operations to really having better conversations with the driver. And yes, there's a million things that companies can do out there, tchotchkes and stuff like that for drivers. But when it comes down to it, a coffee mug is great as an example, but the dispatcher knowing their name, knowing their wife's name, their husband's name makes a difference. That is really what's going to keep drivers engaged for a long time, and they're in it for the long haul, hopefully at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a
So
little,
then,
it's, yeah, you're right on that. Where it's like if you can't do that,
yeah,
there, what can you do, right? Like you said, those little things.
exactly. Control the controllables. And so I want to wrap up with one final question. Actually, two. Sorry about that. What would you say is the most important lesson that you've learned over your career? Again, wearing several different hats in the context of recruiting, retention, and recognition.
Okay. So, yeah, I was like, oh, that was a broad question.
Yeah.
So, most important thing I've learned in the context of recruiting and retention in my career, like wearing all the hats that I've worn, is that at the end of the day, if you care about the person, they will care about you. And it's so very, very simple.
Mhm.
And it just couldn't get any more simpler than that. It's just truly and genuinely care about the person behind the wheel, get to know them, and show them recognition and appreciation. And it's just like I feel like it's not. I wish I could have something more groundbreaking to tell you, but
No,
that this is really it. And
yeah.
um, I've I've learned like smaller things along the way. You know how to communicate better. Communication is everything. You know the way you like, and that should be a skill that everyone needs to work on, no matter what level you're at. Um, how you talk to someone really matters, and that's another thing that I've learned where from just basic things where I'm like, oh, well, I've said it this way, and that's how someone perceived it. But overall, it's just more of like the caring aspect. I think that's made the most impact.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I appreciate you being on the show. And there will be a link to your company page at the bottom of in the show notes, as well as where to apply to be a driver with Apex and her team at Marina. Marina, any final thoughts for the group?
No, thank you for having me. I love this subject. Thank you for shedding light on what's important. You are part of the effort to help build this industry, the image back up, to show that this is an incredible field to be in. To be a driver, you are like such a we saw what happened in COVID, right? Like drivers, we don't get to sit at home. You're an integral part of what makes this economy go. Without our drivers, we would be in a lot of trouble. So what you were doing as a driver is so mightily important, and it just the fact that we and like you, Jackie, myself, are and everybody else who's working right now tirelessly to promote better driver retention and recruiting, and is helping to build this industry back up so that we don't lose drivers to a few bad companies that have misled the
Right.
drivers. And now they're like, well, this is a horrible industry. I don't want to be a part of it. So the more of us, like, that's why we said the sharing information, right? The more people can do the right thing, the more this industry can be lifted up.
Exactly. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and we should do a communication course at some point in our
I
career
love
together to help train other trucking companies on the communication aspect, because that is just so powerful and it goes really a long way. Again, those soft skills are what makes the difference in this industry. And I really appreciate you being on. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Includes another episode of Attention Pension. Thank you so much, Marina, again. And remember, the road to success begins with effective recruitment, thoughtful retention, and genuine recognition. Feel free to share this knowledge with your peers and industry colleagues. Your sharing can make a difference. And together, we can empower the industry to thrive. Until next time.